Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Welcome everyone to our Tuesday evening gathering to read and discuss this wonderful book offered to us by Swami Chaitanya on the life of Holy Mother, titled Sri Sarada Devi, Her Divine Play. We're on page 673, are there any comments or questions left over from our last session that anyone would like to bring up before we go ahead with the reading and discussion? All right, dear, please go ahead.
Okay, Brother Shankara. Good evening, everyone. Again, we are on page 673. But Holy Mother loved to learn new things. Swami Gaurishwarananda recalled, when the mother had completed the lessons of part 1 of Varna Parichaya, the primary book, and had just gone on to learn the first line of part 2, Aikya, unity, Manikya, jewels, Kvakya, bad or obscene words, Hriday snatched the book from her hands, declaring, too much learning is not good for women. It has an adverse effect on their character, leading them to enter into clandestine correspondence with men and read plays and novels.
And read.
Read plays and novels. Do you want me to go back and read one more time then?
No, it's all right.
Okay. Such was the state of the mother's education.
So let's stop there.
Sure.
First, what happened had nothing whatsoever to do with Holy Mother. It had to do with the state of Hridoy's mind. Hridoy was imprisoned in his limitation about women and what they should know. And so he projected that on the Holy Mother, which is the most comical thing he could possibly do. But of course, it didn't faze her in the least, as we'll see. But what is so very interesting, as Sri Ramakrishna said, and has been noted in this book, Holy Mother came as an incarnation of that aspect of the divine feminine called Saraswati. Saraswati is the goddess of learning, of intellect, of science, of art, of education. And we see what has happened to the women of the world since her time. There are very few places left in the world where a woman is treated in this way and denied an education because of these projections of ignorance. And Swami Vivekananda said almost precisely the opposite of what Hridoy said. He said, here in America, which was one of the places that women were receiving the most expansive educations, he said, their character is absolutely wonderful. And part of that is because of their great education and their great learning and their great knowledge, the expanse of their wisdom and knowledge. And he said, it is the women who will lead this forward in the United States. So this is still a borning. It is still beginning to happen because of the limitations of whatever it is that is leading this forward at this point. This hasn't quite happened yet, but I think Swamiji was looking forward more into the future than we have yet seen. So it may not happen in our lifetimes, but I'm sure that Swamiji's words, because he was so emphatic about it and repeated them more than once, that this will be the case, that women will become more and more educated. As a matter of fact, it is a fact now that more women are becoming more highly educated than are men. And here in the United States, or in the West, perhaps generally. So all of what Holy Mother experienced at Fridoi's hands is largely around the world a thing of the past. Any comments or questions from anyone about what has been read and said? All right, please read on, dear.
What was wonderful, however, was the mother's consummate mastery of spiritual knowledge, despite being hardly literate. I was only an adolescent then.
Remember, this is Swami Gaurishwarananda speaking. This is his reminiscence. So I was only an adolescent then.
The mother's education being limited to kuvakya, which is bad or obscene words, I used to have misgivings about her ability to answer the varied questions that devotees, monks, and brahmacharins brought to her. I wondered why they did not take their queries to the venerable Swamis at Belur Math, Swamis Brahmananda, Shivananda, Saradananda, and others who were adept in the scriptures. But the mother never told them, go to Rakho, Tarak, or Sharat for the answers.
Those are the three men that were just spoken of by their Swami names.
But the mother never told them, go to Rakho, Tarak, or Sharat for the answers to their questions. She used to listen to everyone's questions, and her answers were such that all their doubts were resolved. Being too young, I neither understood their questions nor the mother's answers to them, but I saw that all the questioners went away obviously satisfied.
All the questioners went away obviously satisfied. Now, this is something that we experience when we approach these noble souls that are deeply immersed in spiritual grace and are manifestations of the divine. But of course, in Mother's case, it would have been truly extraordinary. She made it so tangible for people. She made it so real for them because she answered them so precisely. And she would know their questions before they even asked them. This has been pointed out before. So before we go on, anything that anyone would like to offer from their own wisdom or experience, or any concern or question that you'd like to raise?
This tells us that spiritual knowledge is so powerful, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
This is so evident that you don't have to have formal school knowledge. Sometimes the spiritual knowledge really enhances our ability to deal with life.
Well, Sri Ramakrishna said, I do not want a bread-winning education. I want to know that by which all else is known. And so this is what he wept to Kali for. He said, tell me everything that is in the Vedas, in the Puranas, in the Tantras, and in the other scriptures, in the Upanishads. Tell me everything I need to know. And he said, that's where all of the words that he spoke came from. And if you want to know exactly what I'm talking about, go to the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna and start reading at page 132. Sri Ramakrishna with Keshab and the Brahmo devotees on a steamer trip that Keshab arranged on the Ganga, on the Ganges River. You will see the master saying to the mother, what shall I tell them, mother? And then he goes into samadhi. And then he comes out and he delivers the most wonderful oration, most simple and easy to understand. And so it's, I think that, well, I know I'm going to recommend to the board here that we publish that chapter of the gospel as a little book, because it is such a great summary of the four yogas and the master's grasp of them as given to him by the mother. And he had no education whatsoever. He had a grammar school education, but no formal education of any kind. He, like the mother, was regarded by, the people who were highly scholarly. They regarded them as illiterate and were absolutely astounded at what they would say, because it was so revealed such deep knowledge, not only of the scriptures, but what was truly behind the scriptures. Many stories are there of the master demonstrating this. So before we go on, anything from anyone?
Yes, Brother Shankar, I have one question.
Yes, Sham.
Was there any difference between the preachings of Holy Mother and Sri Ramakrishna? Any difference at all? Small?
Yes, there was. Holy Mother was more, she though she highly praised the renunciation of the master and acknowledged the greatness of that renunciation. And she taught that renunciation to her monastic disciples. She encouraged that kind of renunciation, that kind of sannyasa on them. But with her householder disciples, she was much more forgiving, much more. The master had very few disciples, approximately 100. And his teachings, even to the householders, were rather rigorous. Not all of them, but most of them. But to Mother's householder disciples, she was extremely generous and sweet. She would tell them all the truth, of course, no compromise with the ideal or the truth. But she would acknowledge that they were in the grip of Maya, and that it was difficult for them to do these things. And so she would often say, "Oh, don't worry about it, dear, I'll do it for you." Often she would say this to people when they expressed their difficulty in being, even with mental renunciation and their spiritual practices. She said, "Oh, don't worry about it, my dears, or my dear. I'll take care of it for you." Now, in some cases, the master also taught this. We have particularly the example of Girish Ghosh, who thought he was getting off easy when he gave the master his power of attorney and put the master fully in charge of his spiritual growth, not knowing that meant that everything that he did from then on was at the Master's will and by his grace. So, so if you read the gospel, and I encourage every one of you to read the gospel, you see so many conversations with so many different people. But the Master was rather, it wasn't that he was narrow in any way, but he simply said, there must be, even to the householders, there must be mental renunciation. And the way for this time is bhakti. Now, Mother taught that also, but she often, as I said, told her troubled disciples, "Oh dear, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it for you." Thank you, Sham, for asking that question. That's a very relevant question.
Thank you. Thank you.
The Mother was just more. I'll give you another example. This had to do with the Master's close disciples, these young men that were to become the monks of the Ramakrishna order. When a group of them were staying with him, and it was time to feed them, the Master said to Mother, "Give them each 2, at the most 3 chapatis." And the Mother said, "No, I will give them as many as they would like." And that's what she did. And the Master didn't say anything more after that. She did, you know. She fed them till they were well fed. The Master, of course, was being, a renunciate, and a renunciate does not take too much food. The Master took very little food, except on a few rare occasions. But by and large, he took very little food. When he would go to celebrations and religious gatherings at his devotee's house in Calcutta, he would often enjoy a large feast. But at Dakshineshwar, and then later on at Kashipur, he ate very little. The Mother did not eat much either, but she fed her disciples lavishly, as well as she could possibly afford. So anything else before we go on? Thanks again, Sham. That was and so this word that we ended on, satisfied. Mother always wanted her devotees, her disciples, to be satisfied. Okay, please read on, Haima.
Whenever copies of the Udbodhan and Tattva Manjari magazines arrived, the Mother would inquire, "Is there any article by Sharad?" If so, she would ask me to read it aloud. Once a Sanskrit hymn was published in the Tattva Manjari. When I read it out to her, the Mother said, "Translate it for me into Bengali." I did not know the meaning of the word Deshikendram and some other words, and there being no dictionary at hand, I said, "I do not know the meaning of some words. I shall ask the meanings from our Sanskrit teacher in the school, and then I shall tell you." She, however, did not give up. "Tell me as much as you have understood," she persisted. The Mother was a perfectionist, and she had a keen eye for details.
Now, when the Swami says she was a perfectionist regarding her own behavior and things that she was doing and interacting with. But she was not in any way a perfectionist when it came to her disciples. As I said, she was very loving and forgiving and motherly with them. So Mother was a perfectionist, and she had a keen eye for details. And that was true regardless of what she was interacting with. But she did not impose that on her disciples. Thank you, Jaime.
Uh-huh. One day, I sprinkled water on sal leaf plates, shook them, and then placed them on the veranda for lunch. Watching me work, the mother said, "Oh no, my son, my children will eat on them. First, wash those leaf plates nicely, otherwise, there will be dust on them." When I was well, I used to wash each leaf and wipe it with a cloth. Another
Now
day, I
that's
was
notice that the mother is saying, when I was well, I did this. I'm not just asking you to do it. This is not something, when I was well, I did that.
Another day, I was placing the asanas at mealtime. The mother saw it from the veranda and told me, "The asanas are not set straight." I rearranged them a little. Even then, she said, "No, they're not straight yet." When I could not find my mistake, she came forward and set them correctly. Then I saw that all the asanas had been placed parallel to each other, equidistant, their fronts presenting a straight line.
Now you see, this is the mother, but she didn't lecture him and say, no, do it just this way. She said, set them straight. When he didn't understand what she said, she came forward and did it. Now, this is a great lesson for us. This is a great lesson for us. When we don't understand what's taught to us in the scriptures and so on, that doesn't mean that we can't get that understanding. If we have this relationship of love and devotion, and particularly if we are offering our actions to the Mother, to the Divine, then she will set us straight in the same way that she set Gaurishwarananda straight here. Gaurishananda. She'll show us. This is not a matter of speculation. This is a matter of experience. Okay, go ahead, please, dear.
Ashwamitra wrote about an interesting event. Once we printed some photos of Holy Mother, size 12 by 15, from the studio of a European photographer. I gave one copy to the mother to see. She took it with both hands and then touched it with her forehead. Seeing her childlike action, I suppressed my laughter. When she returned the photo, I asked her, "Mother, whose photo is this?" Like a simple girl, she replied, "Why, it is my picture." I laughed. She asked, "Why are you laughing?" I replied, "Why did you salute it by touching it to your forehead, your head?" She also laughed and finally said, "The master also dwells in it."
You see, this is that constant refrain
Mhm.
that there is no difference between the mother and the master. When she sees a picture of herself, she sees a picture of that which is behind them both. Which is what? It is Ishwar. It is the divine as it appears to us in time, space, and causation within Maya. And of course, because Maya is duality, it appears as masculine and feminine, or feminine and masculine. Sitaram, Radha Krishna, and Mother and the Master. So that's why she touched it to her head. Any comments or questions from anyone about this before we go on to the next subheading? And Haima, what is the title of this chapter? I've lost track.
This is the Wonder of Wonders.
Oh,
The
yes.
Wonder of Wonders is the subheading. Further Glimpses of Holy Mother is the chapter heading.
Further glimpses of Holy
Uh-huh.
Mother. Wonder of
one-
wonders.
Wonder of Wonders. We finished it just now. And
Yes.
we're moving on to Holy Mother's language.
Okay, before we do anything from anyone.
Yes.
All right, dear.
Okay. Holy Mother's language. We do not have any recordings of Holy Mother's voice, but several disciples and devotees wrote down many of her teachings and also their reminiscences of her. From their memoirs, we have come to know that Holy Mother spoke to the Calcutta devotees in formal Bengali, mixed with colloquialisms, and used the rural language of the Jairambati area when she was with her relatives and people from that village.
Now, this is another difference from the master. The master, except on rare occasions, spoke just in the colloquial language, the rural language of Kamarpukur, which was essentially the same language spoken in Jairambati. They were only just a few miles apart. He would occasionally speak, as he did to Vidyasagar, in more formal language. And I know this because Brother Dhruva has a very good command of both the formal Bengali and the colloquial Bengali, and has done his own translations of many sections of the Katamrita, of the Gospel. And it's his knowledge, isn't just his assertion, it's his knowledge, that the master most often spoke. It didn't matter to whom he was speaking in this colloquial patois of Kamarpukur. As I say, on rare occasions, like when he gave his lecture to Vidyasagar, which was one of the few lectures that he gave, it was in more formal Bengali. He knew it, but he didn't speak it often. It wasn't congenial to him. And he didn't really know Sanskrit. So any comments or questions before we go on? Okay, thank you, dear.
Before we discuss the charm of Holy Mother's language, it is important to understand the difference between colloquial Bengali and the formal literary language. Children learn their colloquial mother tongue from their parents, friends, and relatives, but they learn the formal literary version from books and from teachers in school. Since Holy Mother never learned formal Bengali in a school, her language was simple and sweet. Her words were clear and charming. Her examples were apt and beautiful. Her descriptions were poetic and graphic. Her ideas were profound and meaningful. Her style of conversation was original and captivating. Her pronunciation was like that of the people of the Bankura district of Bengal. For example, she pronounced N in place of L. She said Netu in place of Latu. Kishtanal for Krishnalal. Kanjinal for Kanjilal. Nalit for Lalit. People all loved her endearing mispronunciations. She also used pet names for her closest disciples. For example, she called Jogin Maharaj Chile Jogen, that means boy Jogen. Yoginma was Mei Jogen, that is girl Jogen. and Gaurima was Gaurdasi. She addressed her male disciples and devotees as Baba, meaning my son, and her female disciples and devotees as Ma or Mai, meaning my child or daughter. She always called the master's monastic disciples and her monastic disciples by their pre-monastic names. She explained to Swami Avyananda, you see, I am their mother. It hurts my heart to say their monastic names.
It's an interesting fact. She loved their birth names, and these names, when she says it hurts her heart. Why? Because these monastic names are symbolic of renunciation of their birth, particularly sannyasa. Sannyasa is a way of committing suicide. What you do is offer everything you are and everything you have. When you take sannyas vows, you offer everything you are and everything you have to the fire of Brahman. There is literally a fire. And there are symbolic things that you put in the fire to represent this revocation. You are revoking your birth person and personality. Well, now that is not what the mother related to. These were her children. She gave birth to them. So when she says it hurt her heart to call them by their monastic names, she just didn't. She called them by their birth names because that's who she knew and loved. And it isn't that she in any way disapproved of sannyas. She encouraged sannyas on many of her disciples, both male and female. You know, Gorima, Golapma, Yoginma, they all lived as nuns. They didn't take formal vows, I don't think any of them, until both the mother and master had left the body. But I'm not certain about that. If anybody does know, please come forward and say. But in any event, she had encouraged some of her female disciples to live as sannyasins. But this business about calling her disciples and her loved ones by their pre-monastic names, even if they were the master's disciples, that's the reason why. Any comment or question from anyone? When she says, it hurts my heart to say their monastic names, she meant that quite literally. That was not a metaphorical statement. Okay, dear.
She explained to Swami Avyananda, you see, I am their mother. It hurts my heart to say their monastic names. She always referred to Ramakrishna as Thakur, meaning master.
She often referred to him as Gadai or Gadadhar also, particularly when they were together at Dakshineshwar. She spoke of him as my Gadai. But after his passing, she typically called him Thakur. Okay.
Sometimes the mother's sentences were short and cryptic, mixed with elegant and colloquial Bengali phrases. Some of her village patios.
Patwa.
Oh, patoi. What is that, Brother Shankara? Patois?
Patwa. It's a French word meaning dialect.
I see. Patoi? Is that how?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, dear.
Village patoi?
Patwa.
Patwa. I see. Village
just as if it were spelled P-A-T-W-A,
Yes.
patwa.
Some of her village patwas was not clearly
No,
understandable.
not patwas, not patwas. It's not plural. Patwa,
Patwa.
patwa.
Some of her village patwa was not clearly understandable to people from Calcutta. Yet her words were forceful and powerful, her conversation sweet and charming, and her teachings meaningful and inspiring because she spoke only the truth, and truth is ever fresh and never becomes old.
Isn't that the truth?
Oh,
I mean, isn't that something that we can all reflect on? The truth never becomes stale, never becomes boring. It's lovely to hear it in various forms and ways, but we can hear the same thing if we hear the master saying, "Oh, you need not formally renounce," to his householder disciples. You need not formally renounce, but it will be auspicious for you if you mentally renounce. I mean, we can hear that many, many times, and it is still fresh and true. Any comments or questions from anyone about these things? All right, dear.
truth is ever fresh and never becomes old. Although the mother's teachings are almost 100 years old, they still inspire millions of people all over the world.
Including our sweet selves.
We may translate her conversations and teachings into English and make an effort to convey the meaning to the readers. But it is almost impossible to express the beauty and mood, the similes and metaphors, and the idioms and proverbs of her language. Some writers have tried to translate the teachings of the mother literally, but those translations are not always understandable and readable, especially to Westerners. Of course, no translation can do full justice to the original.
And anyone who translates, anyone, and you can find this in Swami Prabhavananda's writings, he was a great translator. But what he said is, I'm not truly a translator, I'm an interpreter. I'm interpreting this for you in language that is understandable to Westerners. And he said in his translation and interpretation of the Gita, the reason that he included Christopher Isherwood in doing this, and I mean he included him, it wasn't as if somehow Isherwood was on the periphery of this. No, they worked shoulder to shoulder. And the reason was because Isherwood was such a successful and graceful writer in English and had such a command of the English language. And so Swami Prabhavananda depended on him a great deal to translate or interpret what Sri Krishna said or what Patanjali said in Western language, in language that would be accessible to us. Another example of this is Daniel Ladinsky in his book, Love Poems from God. He's been accused of not interpreting these things accurately because they're not literal. The translations are not literal. And he says, I never pretended to be that kind of translator. I'm an interpreter. I'm trying to have you understand what I'm saying. Like when Tukaram is about to leave the body, he tells his wife, this is the interpretation of Tukaram that's in the book Love Poems from God. He says, oh, well, the Lord is going to send a taxi for me. Do you want to come? Now, of course, he didn't say taxi, because there were no taxis in those days. It almost certainly is some form of the word chariot or something of that kind. But most Westerners these days, they have no idea what is a chariot in the sense that Tukaram would admit it. So he said, a taxi. And his wife replied, oh, who would take as good a care of our cows as I do? So she declined to get in the taxi, go with him in the taxi. And of course, the next morning, what he did was walk away some distance with some of his disciples, kiss them all sweetly, and then leave them there and walk on, and was never heard of again. So this is what's meant by interpretation rather than literal translation. Any comments or questions before we go on to the next subhead? Okay, dears.
Okay. Next subheading is some original expressions of Holy Mother. Holy Mother was not a literary person, but some of her words and similes, comments, and descriptions were original and profound. It is extremely difficult to translate her words and expressions into English, and it is impossible to convey the flavor, freshness, and beauty of her original language. Here we cite some examples. In 1899, when Swami Yogananda passed away, Holy Mother cried out, "A brick has come out of the building. Now the whole thing will come down." In 1911,
No, what did she mean? She meant that so much depended on Jogin. She always called him Jogin. On Swami Yogananda. So much depended on him. And as we know, if something is constructed of bricks and a brick is taken out of a critical place in that wall, the whole wall will come down. And that's what she meant. But I'm sure that what she said in Bengali was, it expressed her, what was in her heart, more than this simple story of a brick and the wall, the whole thing coming down. Any comments or questions from anyone?
to me, she implies that he was the foundation of everything there, the building, just like
Yes,
that's what it
yes.
feels.
Okay.
In 1911, when Swami Ramakrishnananda passed away, the grief-stricken mother said, "Alas, Shashi is gone. My back is broken." So,
Now, again, what can this possibly mean? She doesn't mean that her back is literally broken. What is true of a person whose back is broken? They are much more limited in their ability to act, and they're in great pain. Great pain. So we can't just pass by these things. We have to let our minds rest on them. And so what is it that is when she says my, and notice she calls Ramakrishnananda Shashi, his birth name. My back is broken. A person with a broken back is in great pain and very limited in their ability to act as they acted before.
it was like a backbone for her, Brother Shankara. He was almost like backbone of her.
He was that which enabled her to act in ways that she was not able to act, she's saying, without him. And this business about the great pain, I mean, when the Swami says grief-stricken mother, he is not exaggerating or making some point. It's just the fact that mother was very distressed. She wept for days. She wept for days. My back is broken. Anything from anyone? All right, dears.
In 1911, when Nivedita died, she expressed her grief by saying, "All creatures cry for a great soul."
Now, what does that mean? Swami Vivekananda said, "Where shall we go to find God, if not in our own hearts and in every living being?" So what does this mean? Every living being is connected. And so when Nivedita passed away, she said, all creatures cry for a great soul. She was saying that the world was weeping. And for that matter, the universe was weeping because a great soul had left time, space, and causation. And but in fact, she hadn't gone very far. There's much evidence that Nivedita also remained in her subtle body to serve, to continue serving with Swami Vivekananda, her master, as she called him. But this is what's meant by all creatures cry for a great soul. Okay, dear?
In 1918, when Premananda died, the mother lamented, saying, Baburam was dearest to my heart. All the energy, devotion, and wisdom of Belur Math were embodied in my Baburam and walked there on the bank of the Ganges.
Now, what is she talking about? For those of you who don't know, Baburam, Swami Premananda, he was one of the master's closest direct disciples. He became, and it was at Baburam's paternal home that the Ramakrishna order was founded in 1887, on Christmas Eve of 1887. The young men who were to be the core of the Ramakrishna order, Vivekananda and so on, they had gone to celebrate the holiday to Baburam's paternal home. So the order was founded at his home, with Swami Vivekananda spending the night talking about Christ. And then they all took their monastic vows at this Duni, sacred fire. Though they weren't formal vows, but they were vows nevertheless. By formal vows, I mean there wasn't all the ceremony that goes with formal monastic sannyas vows. So when she's talking about Baburam and Belur Math, he was the manager of the Belur Math during his lifetime. And he was so good at it, and so sweet, and so loving. Everyone loved him. Everyone without exception loved Baburam Premananda. And so when she says, all the energy, devotion, and wisdom of Belur Math, energy, devotion, wisdom of Belur Math were embodied in my Baburam and walked there on the bank of the Ganges. Any other observations or any knowledge about Swami Premananda that anyone would like to share? It's a shame that Shailesh isn't with us this evening. He was with us last night for the 4th of July. It was very sweet. But it's a shame because I know he would have something to say from his knowledge of Bellarmont and so on.
Yeah, I
Anything-
think it is Hari Om Shankaraji.
Hello, Hari Om.
This is Baburam is such a loving person. He is synonymous for love. Actually, I think it is Raja Maharaj says when he was the, if I remember correctly, the Baburam is the one, the mother brings him to Thakur, and her wish was, that I should die before him. Is that Baburam, right? That's Premananda.
Yes, that's Babu Ram and Premananda are the same.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for offering that, Valadada. Okay. Anything else from anyone? All right. Please read on, dear.
Ashu once fell sick in Jairampati, and Holy Mother took care of him. Deeply moved, he asked, Mother, shall I receive your affection all through my life? She replied, Yes, my son. In my love, there is no ebb tide or flood tide.
Aha. This is the very definition. What a lovely, and the Swami doesn't say this, Chaitanya doesn't say, but is that not the definition of unconditional love? There is no ebb tide or flood tide in my love. Ah, and what we can think of as her children, this is true for us as well. And this is what I meant by mother was more loving and forgiving than you can say anyone, because her love was unconditional. And of course, it's described in the Chandi. It's described in the Chandi, these 700 verses on the Divine Feminine, that everyone and everything, without exception, is the mother's child. Everything that lives and breathes, even the stones and the wood of the forest, it's all her children and all her creation. And her love for it is unqualified and no ebb nor flood tide in that. Okay, dear.
Observing the greed and selfishness of her family members, she one day exclaimed, Look, I am a lotus that has bloomed in this dump site.
Which is about as close as she would come to criticizing anyone. I'm a lotus that has bloomed in this dump site. Well,
We all have some dump sites, right, Brother Shankara?
Say it again.
We all have, some of us have those dump sites in our families,
Well, we all know.
There is a
we
little
all
dump
know-
site everywhere.
We all know what she means, don't we?
Exactly,
We know what
exactly.
she means. But the lotus blooms in the mud even of a pond.
Exactly.
It doesn't bloom on a high pristine hill.
Not at all.
The lotus blooms in the mud of a pond.
Yes.
Okay, dear, thank you. Go on.
About Swami Sharadananda, she remarked, Sharath is like my Vasuki. Vasuki means a mythical thousand-hooded snake. It is said that he protected the newborn baby, Krishna, from rain by spreading his huge hood over him. That is called Vasuki. So she said about Swami Saradananda, she remarked, Sharath is like my Vasuki, engaged in thousands of activities. Whenever rain pours, he spreads his umbrella to protect me.
Ah, so that's what's.
What a
I'm glad you read the footnote, dear.
Yes.
That's so. Whenever rain pours, he spreads his umbrella to protect me, and he did. I mean, that's why he built that Udbodhan residence, so that mother wouldn't have to go from here to there and be, an itinerant tenant of other people's homes. He built her own home. And he did something very unusual for a monk. He borrowed of what was a sizable amount of money. And then he set out to write the great master as a way to have a book to sell to pay off that debt. Because he couldn't take money from the Udbodhan. The Udbodhan was the magazine. He had to get the money from elsewhere. So he wrote that book in his, quote, spare time, unquote. He was the general secretary, which is the chief executive officer of the Ramakrishna Order. Now, the Ramakrishna Order was at that time undergoing great expansion. Swami Brahmananda was opening centers here and there, and there was so much business to attend to, so many contracts for this, purchase of that, rental of this. I mean, so many things. This is what Mother meant, that he just handled thousands of activities. Thousands.
It's,
So I think we'll leave it there, dear.
we can stop there, Brother Shankara. That's great.
It's 8:27.
Yeah.
It is so we'll start there with 1 year on Guru Purnima. Or maybe we'll go back and read about Sharat before, as a way to start next week. Any final thoughts from anyone? All right, dears. What we're hearing, of course, is the Swami summarizes these things that let us understand what he means by wonder of wonders. This mother in all her, in her many facets. But just remember what the mother said, that she is our mother, our true mother, our real mother. This is what she said. I am your true mother, your real mother. And so what does that mean? We can turn to her in any way, for any reason, pour out our heart to her, and make the most petitionary kind of prayers to her. She said, remember, when you are in distress, you have a mother. Now that is her invitation, to just pour out your heart in petitionary prayer to the mother. When you are in distress, remember, you have a mother, your true mother, your real mother. Any final thought or question or concern from anyone? All right, dears. Oh, dearly beloved, a flower at your feet for each one who comes to your open door. A flower at your feet for each one who stands by your open door and says, come to me, offering to break this world's chain that binds us down to ignorance, suffering, and death. A flower at your feet for each one who takes the path that you have struck through this, your jungle world. Om, Amen. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace and beneficence be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai, Durga, Durga, Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. May we go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our mother and father. Any final thought from anyone? Anything from anyone? All right, dears. Of course, tomorrow night we'll read and discuss Swami Ranganathananda's wonderful book, Divine Grace. We're not very far along. It'll take us a while to get through this 83-page book because it's so rich, so rich. It's a lecture that he gave in Perth, Australia in 1978 when he was still a relatively young man. And it's very vigorous, very full of spiritual wisdom and encouragement to us. He delivered this to a Shivananda ashrama group in Perth, Australia in 1978. The last time I saw him was in 1999 when he was serving as revered President Maharaj of the Ramakrishna Order. Now, of course, the presidency of the Ramakrishna Order is a spiritual position, not an administrative one, though the president is a trustee. The general secretary is the chief executive officer. The president is a spiritual leader and spiritual guide. The face of the divine for the Ramakrishna Order in its most comprehensive sense. And we asked for an audience with him. There were 5 of us. And we asked for an audience with him, and we were told, all right, 10 minutes. Well, after we'd been there nearly an hour, he was still waving away his attendants and showering us with his grace. Such was the grandeur of Swami Ranganathananda. So, a sweet good night to all of you until tomorrow evening. And then, of course, we have our Saturday class on how to know God. And on Sunday, we'll have a talk. I'd say what the title was, but I've forgotten. So it's on the website. Until then, good night.